Most Christian entrepreneurs live with a quiet, unspoken split. Sunday is sacred. Monday through Friday is just work, necessary, sometimes draining, something you do to fund the parts of life that actually matter to God. You pray before the big pitch. You tithe from the profits. You put a Bible verse in your email signature. But the actual work, the spreadsheets, the client calls, the product meetings, that feels ordinary. Worldly, even. Separate from worship. Maybe it's the Sunday you finally feel present in worship, and the Monday you're already dreading the version of yourself that has to sit through another status meeting pretending to care. Maybe it's the quiet guilt of enjoying your work a little too much, as if genuine satisfaction in a job well done is somehow a spiritual red flag instead of exactly what it was designed to feel like. Here's the question this video is actually asking: what if that entire split is wrong? What if the work itself was never the curse to begin with? To answer that, we have to go back further than most people expect, not to the moment sin entered the world, but to the moment just before it. Genesis 2 verse 15 records something easy to read past: "Then the Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and guard it." Read the order of events here. This is before Genesis 3. Before the fruit, before the curse, before thorns and sweat were introduced as consequences. Adam's very first assignment, before Eve, before children, before any of it, was work. God didn't design humanity for leisure and then reluctantly add labor as a punishment later. Work was the first thing on the list. And just one chapter earlier, Genesis 1 verse 31 tells us how God evaluated everything he'd made, work included. God looked at everything he had made, and he was very pleased. Not just the sky, the water, the animals. Everything, a world that already included the assignment to work it. That changes what the curse in Genesis 3 actually did. It didn't invent work. It made work hard, frustrating, exhausting, resistant. But it didn't change what work fundamentally is. If work were inherently secular, a necessary evil to escape from, then everything you build your business on would be time spent away from God. But if work was there before sin, built into the blueprint of a very good world, then it was never the opposite of worship. It might have been a form of it all along. There's a craftsman later in the story who makes this concrete in a way that's easy to miss. Exodus 31 verses 1 to 5 introduces Bezalel, hand-picked for a very specific job. The Lord said to Moses, "I have chosen Bezalel, and I have filled him with my power. I have given him understanding, skill, and ability for every kind of artistic work, for planning skillful designs and working them in gold, silver, and bronze, for cutting jewels to be set, for carving wood, and for every other kind of artistic work." Stop on what's actually happening there. The same divine power that hovers over creation in Genesis 1 is the power filling a metalworker. Not a priest. Not a prophet. A craftsman, someone who cuts jewels and carves wood for a living. God didn't just permit Bezalel's technical skill. He personally supplied it, named it, and called it filled with his own power. Think about what the tabernacle actually needed at that moment. It needed accurate measurements, well-fitted joints, gold worked without flaw, gemstones cut precisely enough to sit correctly in their settings. It needed, in other words, a genuinely excellent technician, not someone with good intentions and mediocre craftsmanship. God's response to that need wasn't to lower the bar because the project was sacred. It was to personally fill a specific person with the exact technical competence the sacred project required. Skill wasn't in tension with holiness here. Skill was how holiness got built. Here's what's easy to miss in both of those passages: neither one is talking about spiritual work in the way we usually mean it. Cultivating a garden isn't a sermon. Cutting jewels and carving wood isn't a worship service. These are ordinary trades, the Bronze Age equivalent of a mechanic, a coder, a graphic designer. And the text treats them as sacred assignments anyway. That's the actual claim underneath this video: your professional skills aren't secular tools you occasionally bring to God's altar on Sunday. They're gifts He built into you on purpose, meant to be exercised with excellence because of who gave them, not just what they produce. Colossians 3 verses 23 to 24 makes the application explicit. Centuries after Bezalel, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as though you were working for the Lord and not for people. Notice the word choice. Not, whatever spiritual thing you do. Whatever you do. The client email. The budget spreadsheet. The product roadmap. If mediocrity isn't acceptable when you think of it as an offering to God, then the sacred/secular divide most entrepreneurs live inside collapses the moment you actually believe that verse. This isn't permission to relax about quality because God sees my heart, not my output. It's the opposite. Bezalel didn't get to submit sloppy craftsmanship because his heart was in the right place. The tabernacle needed the actual gold to be actually well worked. Excellence isn't optional once you see the work itself as the offering, it becomes the point. There's a second thing this reframes, how you talk about your own work, even just internally. A lot of Christian entrepreneurs unconsciously rank their calling against a hierarchy that doesn't actually exist in Scripture, pastors and missionaries at the top, everyone else's job somewhere further down, tolerated as long as it funds the real ministry. Bezalel obliterates that hierarchy before it can even form. He worked alongside priests, but he wasn't one. He was a builder, personally spirit-filled for the same project, doing work that required precision, taste, and technical mastery rather than sermons. The Bible doesn't rank his contribution as secondary support staff. It names him, credits the source of his skill directly to God, and gives him 7 verses most of us skip past without noticing what they're actually claiming. This isn't just an ancient framework with no modern echo. Ed Catmull, co-founder of Pixar Animation Studios, built the entire company on a philosophy strikingly close to Genesis 2:15's logic, whether he intended the parallel or not. Creative work isn't a means to profit, it's the actual mission. Pixar's internal culture, including its famous brain trust feedback process, was built around treating the craft itself as inherently worth doing well, not just as a vehicle to a box office number. Catmull has written and spoken publicly about this for years. When the work itself is treated as valuable, not merely as a means to revenue, both the product and the people doing it tend to flourish. Pixar didn't get there by accident. The studio's insistence on craft over shortcuts is exactly why films that took years longer than planned still shipped as genuinely excellent work rather than rushed products. Patagonia took a more radical version of the same principle further than almost any company its size. In 2022, founder Yvon Chouinard didn't sell the company, he gave it away, transferring ownership into a trust and a non-profit structured specifically to fund environmental work in perpetuity. That decision only makes sense under one premise: the business was never fully his to extract value from. It was something he was stewarding, the same posture Genesis 2:15 assigns to the very first job description in the Bible: cultivate it, guard it, not simply own it and cash it out. Chouinard's own explanation at the time echoed this almost exactly. Instead of going public, he said, the company was going purpose, treating the business itself as something entrusted to him rather than something he'd built purely to extract from. Neither Catmull nor Chouinard were quoting Exodus 31. But the shape of the conviction is the same: work treated as inherently meaningful, not just instrumentally useful, tends to produce both better craftsmanship and a healthier relationship to the business itself. One company protected the quality of the work. The other protected who the work ultimately belonged to. Both decisions only make sense if you already believe, even without the biblical language for it, that the work in front of you is worth more than what it can be sold for. Quick pause: if this framework is useful to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're building a full biblical case for entrepreneurship, one principle at a time, and you'll want the rest of the series. So what does this actually change this week, in your business specifically? First, pick one task on tomorrow's to-do list that currently feels purely administrative: an invoice, a spreadsheet, a routine email, and consciously treat it as Bezalel would have treated a piece of unremarkable metalwork inside a much larger, sacred project. Not because anyone's watching. Because of what it actually is. If Bezalel's spirit-given skill covered cutting jewels and carving wood, it's hard to argue your spreadsheet is somehow too mundane to count. Second, Rewrite one line of how you describe your own work, at least to yourself. Not, I run a marketing agency, as a flat, secular fact, but I steward a set of communication skills that help people tell the truth about what they've built. That's not a rebrand for other people. It's a recalibration for you. Say it out loud once, even if it feels a little awkward. The awkwardness is usually a sign of exactly how deep the sacred/secular split has actually settled in. Third, the next time you catch yourself feeling like your work is just business, separate from the parts of your life that actually matter to God, go back to Genesis 2 verse 15. The very first job in the Bible was assigned before sin, before the fall, inside a world God called very good. Whatever you're doing this week, you're not waiting to get to the sacred part. You're already in it. None of these 3 steps will show up as a line item anywhere. Nobody grading your quarter will notice that you started treating your invoices differently. But that's consistent with everything this video has actually been arguing. The value was never contingent on being noticed. Bezalel's work has survived for 3,000 years in a text millions of people read. He wasn't optimizing for a highlight reel. He was building well because building well was what the moment required of him, regardless of who was watching him do it. This connects to something from the first video in this series, on Daniel and integrity. Daniel's administrative work, audits, reports, government paperwork, wasn't glamorous either. Nobody would have called it sacred on its face. But he did it with a consistency that outlasted an entire conspiracy built to trap him. That's the same principle from 2 different angles. Bezalel shows that the skill itself is God-given. Daniel shows that the character you bring to exercising it is what actually gets tested. Put them together, and the picture is complete. Your craft matters, and how you do it matters just as much. Work was never the curse. Genesis 3 made it hard, but Genesis 2 had already made it sacred, before anything went wrong. Adam's first assignment. Bezalel's spirit-filled craftsmanship. Your invoice, your client call, your product roadmap. None of that is a distraction from what God cares about. It might be one of the clearest pictures of it. If this was helpful, next time we're looking at what actually happens when generosity gets treated as a formula instead of a form of trust. Subscribe if you want to keep building this with us.